To make a move like that, you have to have kahunas and conviction.
Long term, I'm bullish. We could see about a 20% correction next year.
This is Josh Jelinski, the financial quarterback. Don't touch that dial. Describe for our listeners what money supply theory is, then, before we go to what you believe.
Oh, yes. Well, another word for it is the phrase is the quantity theory of money. So if you double the money supply, the idea is that will double the price level. And the assumption behind the theory is that the government has the ability to double the money supply anytime it likes. But I don't think that's true. The people decide how much money to hold in their bank accounts, in the form of cash. And if the government wants to give them more, they'll just deposit it in the banking system, and they'll stay with what they want. But that is the quantity theory of money.
Wow. And what do you believe currently?
Well, there's another way of looking at it. The quality theory of money says that when money becomes less attractive as an asset to hold, especially for the future, then it'll lose value. And we all know this is true, goes back hundreds, thousands of years. Henry VIII was a very bad case. Henry VIII, King of England, he cut the silver content of the English coinage at that time during his reign by about 50% and expressed surprise that the price level doubled. That's the quality theory of money. Now, we don't have coins anymore. Our system isn't based on coins. But if you have less confidence in the monetary system for any reason, it's going to drive up or drive down the value that money commands in the marketplace, which is another way of saying it's inflationary.
So where do you believe we're headed now? I remember you came on the show a few years ago, said we would have persistent inflation. What's your take on inflation right now?
Yeah, same as before. There's one factor I didn't say anything about when I appeared on the show before. It wasn't in the front of my mind, but I've known about it for quite some time. Lots of people have addressed it. That's the role that energy prices play. And we've had, normally energy prices are fairly close to equilibrium, but since the Ukraine war broke out and since the Western sanctions were imposed on Russia, we're still trying to close down Russia's oil industry to stop the revenue flow that supports the Putin regime. And it's not working because the Russians can find other customers. If they're closed out of Europe, they will go to India, which they have now done, and sell a lot of more oil than they did before to China, and recover customers all over the rest of the world. Not all of the countries around the world are friendly to the United States in the first place. So the Russians are inducing new customers to come and buy their oil, but they've had to discount it very heavily. And the West is trying to discount the price of oil to keep the Russian revenues down as well. So the combination of both has been a massive fall in not only the crude oil price, but in natural gas prices and energy generally. And that's had a restraining effect on the inflation rate, which is certainly not normal and can't last.
You believe inflation's going to be persistent. When will it cool?
I don't see any way to cool it without turning the clock back to earlier systems of monetary management that we had way back in the past. The Bretton Woods system was such a system. And under that system, the dollar was tied to gold at a fixed price, $35 an ounce. Gold is still a major player in the international monetary system, but the monetary authorities don't want the private sector to be involved in the gold industry very much, but they are massive. The central banks around the world, and especially our rivals in Russia and China and other places, are building up their gold reserves very rapidly because they know that gold is the basis for a strong monetary system.
And why do you, we have an analyst on staff, Stan Hartley, chief market strategist, who follows the 40-year interest rate cycle. Are you a believer in that?
No, things look like cycles. When you plot a graph and you go back 100 years, you can see a cycle, you think. But actually, it's just a string of random numbers. You can easily be deceived, and there are such things as cycles. But I don't see an interest rate cycle. I think interest rates depend on central banks. Central banks are run by people who have various views, and you never can tell what the view is going to be. So central banks will change their policies from time to time, not in a cyclical way, but in a random way.
Yeah, but I would say, if you go back 40 years, you were at the last interest rate spike. 40 years before that, interest rate spike with war bonds. 40 years, so there is some interesting appeal to a 40-year rate cycle based on his work, but that's fine. How do you feel about the Fed's strategy to battle inflation and the effect it's had on banks across the country?
Yeah, the Fed's strategy basically is to raise interest rates. That's been their belief has been that would do it for a very long time. And we have the example of Paul Volcker to encourage them to think that it would actually work. But if you study the history of interest rates, as I have, in this case, we're talking about short-term interest rates, and look at the times when the Fed raised them and the times when the Fed cut them, and look for changes in the inflation rate that took place following those Fed actions, there's nothing there. Hard to believe, because everybody is talking about it. Everybody believes what somebody else is saying, and they all believe what the central bank is telling us. The Fed is very much takes this for granted. But the evidence that it actually works, raising interest rates, I find the evidence is missing, and that you can't lower inflation that way. You have to lower inflation by restoring confidence in the monetary system, which raising interest rates does not do. And you can do it, though, by tying money back to some kind of stable standard. The Russians know it, the Chinese know it. We're the ones, we and the British, actually, it's the British as well, just don't believe in gold. We want to have a monetary system that we can manipulate at will, and gold gets in the way. It's an obstacle. And so there's a tremendous bad feeling about gold throughout the monetary industry.